So the report is about the investigations of torture that happened after the 9/11 attacks, and how it was essentially covered up, and that the truth had to be found out by Daniel Jones. Now, this is a film that in it follows like a formula we're fairly familiar with like with an investigation type of film, which is peering through documents, trying to uncover the truth, and how it's a long, grueling, and draining process. Like the final report that ended up being processed about this was over 6,000 pages long. Like at one point, I think they get to something like 1,000 or 2,000 pages, and they basically asked Daniel, "This is pretty long. You sure you want to keep going with this?" But he realized that there's a lot that's left unresolved here that needs to come out and that needs to be addressed because it was covered up, and they want to figure out why these tortures were being covered up about trying to extract information from prisoners. Now, this film kind of like it falters back and forth, I think, between asking like the bigger questions about uncovering the truth and how ineffective torture is for extracting information. Because the film jumps around tons all over the map. Like it showcases the events after September 11th to all the way up to like 2011 and 2012, and how stuff followed on from there. At one point, this might have been like a kind of like a jab in the film, but at one point, like Daniel watches the television and sees there's a news report that addresses the film Zero Dark 30, which I think might have been a bad call to like focus too much on that, because it wasn't like that Mystery Science Theater thing they had where they said, don't show a better film within your film because then it might not make you look as good. I don't really think Zero Dark 30 is that great a film, but it does kind of showcase like, oh, Zero Dark 30, they made more action-packed and it's more exciting, and here I am trying to assemble this report on tortures and crimes against humanity, and it's in like this very small, secluded room, just peering through computers and pages and pages of documents, and just debating whether or not this stuff is going to come out, or if it will ever come out. Like at several points in the film, they say, "Look, you did a good job, but we don't know if this information is ever going to be released." Like several times, they look at his stuff and they redact so much of it to the point where it's like it's barely even readable and like barely says anything. That Daniel just keeps on putting up this fight for it, of just constantly trying to push this issue, trying to say that this information needs to get out there. Contrasting with that, we also jump into the actual torture of prisoners, which they focus on in like little bits and pieces here and there, and there are little discussions in between there about how effective it is. I think probably one of the most interesting scenes in the film is like after they've tortured a prisoner, and they're discussing like what information did they get out of there. And they say like, well, we got this information, but it wasn't really true. So we don't know if the torture was effective or not. But then they say, oh, well, the torture has kind of proved to us one thing. It proved that he is a liar. So we think we can get more information out of him. And it's like, this is kind of like the cynical, cyclical nature of torture that doesn't really work the way that they think it does. Like there have been numerous reports that shown that, in terms of like extracting information, torture from this aspect, is not really effective for getting the truth. Like, because if you're tortured that much, wouldn't you just tell them anything? Like, even if you didn't know anything, you'd make up some stuff from that amount of torture. And it's like, they don't consider that because they realize that, any torture, any progress being made is one step forward, which does play off of, this sort of, like catharsis for, after the September 11th attacks, of ensuring like, they don't happen ever again, that you take any steps necessary, that it becomes more about the action and the process as opposed to, thinking, what are we doing going forward? And is it more inhumane than our enemies that we're fighting? That aspect is focused on a little bit. It's focused on here and there, and we do see like how horrific a lot of the tortures are with with like waterboarding and some of the like the sensory tortures that they do focus on them A little bit, because like I said, they're mostly stooped in just trying to uncover this information and get to the truth of the matter. So it fluctuates between, horrific scenes of torture and just Daniel Jones just peering through all this information. And it functions kind of like a workhorse political drama of trying to uncover the truth here. It stoops itself like within like a lot of meetings and a lot of like somewhat heated discussions, although they seem a little bit toned down here. It seems like they're like, okay, look, this is a heated discussion, but don't try to overdo it. Don't try to give it too much of a Hollywood overtone here. And Adam Driver really kind of like pulls it back here. He tries to give it a very earnest and strong performance here that isn't too overblown. He doesn't explode, and there are several points where in this story you could see him just exploding, but he always feels just held back enough. Huge ensemble here, which I kind of expected, from producer Steven Soderbergh. Soderbergh usually finds a way to, get like a fairly large cast here. It's directed by Scott Burns, who has actually written on a lot of Soderbergh films. He's directed one, I believe. I don't think it was a Soderbergh film, but he's worked with him quite a bit on a lot of these films. He has written and directed this film, and the film has a very narrow focus on this investigation that I think works in terms of like being informative and somewhat contemplative on this type of story. But at the same time, I feel like the way that it bounces back and forth, I feel like it kind of it's fairly fast paced for the time frame that it's covering from here. Because like I said, it's non-linear, it jumps all around the place, so naturally it's going to be a little bit fast paced to keep up with the pacing here. I just feel like it's sort of like, because of all that jumping around and that narrow focus of trying to focus on this report and what was the aftermath of it, like the aftermath is kind of in the background. Like it ends by stating that a lot of these people who were like accused of these acts of like torture were not really disciplined for it. In fact, a lot of them were promoted, that they bring up at the end of the film. But I feel like I almost feel like this is a film that if it had like an extra half hour on it, I feel like it could have touched on something a little bit bigger here. But as it stands right now, it's just kind of like a workhorse picture. Like it peels back a lot of what you want to know about like this type of investigation, but at the same time, you feel like there's so much more that's kind of like left on the table here that isn't really addressed, as it kind of like jumps from scene to scene, trying to paint this picture of how assembling this 6,000 plus page report was just like a grueling experience, and how like even though like this information came out, like nothing really was done with it. And it's frustrating and agonizing that all this work went into something that was barely like not a whole lot came from it. So you almost feel like there could be another aspect to this story that could be explored from there, but it doesn't quite feel there. It doesn't quite feel like it's there, that it just feels a little bit off. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the performances here. You have an amazing cast here. Tim Blake Nelson, John Hamm, Annette Bening, Ted Levine, Michael C. Hall. Everyone in this film, I think, does a great job for being locked for playing their roles in this investigation. I just feel like it needs like that one extra kick to make it a little bit more engaging, to make it a little bit more provocative, to actually get you more interested in it. Because right now it's just kind of just a workhorse picture, which is, it's more informative than it is entertaining. And I suppose, yeah, that's the point, is that if you're making a 6,000 page report on on these tortures, it's really not that exciting. If anything, I would say make it more boring than it would actually speak a little bit more volumes. But as it stands right now, for the report, 2.5 out of 5 stars. Not a bad film, some good performances, just not quite there.